Howdy. You know, something I find more refreshing about recent Family Guy episodes is I honestly never have any idea what to expect. While sometimes episodes might get pretty trashy and unpleasant, there are also often pockets of really funny satire and jokes. For all the drawn-out cutaway gags and unpleasant, awkward jokes, I really don't know any cartoon out there quite like Family Guy. So why don't we take a look over some of the show's better and lousier modern episodes? Let's check out the top 5 worst and best modern Family Guy episodes. For this list, we're mainly going to look at episodes from the last 5 years or so, since I've covered earlier Family Guy episodes a lot in the past, so season 14 onwards. And just an early heads up, this vid may contain some more animated violence and dark themes than usual. It is modern Family Guy we're talking about, and they don't tend to pull any punches. The second worst particularly is really cringeworthy, and if you do disagree or agree with my thoughts on these episodes, I'd welcome your own perspective in the comments. Anyway, on to the countdown. For the 5th worst, Girl Interneted. There's something about cartoons talking about online personalities that feels really off-putting to me, and Family Guy just doesn't seem to show much understanding of how people interact online, and online content creators in general.
Meet disgraced YouTube star Logan Paul and his cool bus.
In the episode, the Griffins attend a local streaming convention, a bit like VidCon, where numerous unfunny internet jokes await them.
Hey, you know how Snapchat puts a fake dog tongue on you? How'd you like a real one?
Eventually, they attend a panel hosted by Corey of Corey's World, a newer recurring character within the series.
What's going on, guys? I'm Corey from Corey's World.
Corey boasts that he could make anyone famous just by giving them a simple shout-out. Don't you just love it when an internet personality treats you like a sheep? Jeepers. Anyway, Peter challenges this claim, offering Meg to be the next internet celebrity.
I bet you can't make my daughter Meg an internet celebrity.
Dad, stop.
Corey takes a simple photo of her with the hashtag FridgeBodMeg, and she receives thousands of followers and loads of attention almost immediately. Okay, to start with, this feels completely unrealistic given the fact that she didn't create any content before being given a shout out. It also comes off as a little over-glamorous and silly, and I kind of wish the episode portrayed some of the negative aspects of social media attention, how it isn't necessarily just a one-way ticket to a perfect life, and how difficult and time-consuming it can be for creators to get social media traction at all. Because for every one social media star, there's 100,000 more people desperately trying to get a quarter of the attention they do. Anyway, the conflict that happens is basically Meg jeopardizes her health in order to keep creating content, as her content revolves around her eating food, and this influences other teenagers to practice unhealthy eating habits as well. Good social commentary. Well done. Though I'm fine with this conflict, and the underlying message of valuing our health over online fame is more important than ever nowadays. Probably what put me off the most though was some of the grotesque imagery we get, like Meg's gangrenous legs. Ugh. The subplot isn't much better. Basically, Brian borrows a Hummer from a mechanic while he fixes his Prius, and the rest of the episode is basically making some second-rate jokes about Brian being a Hummer guy. Yay.
I just hope I don't get branded a Hummer guy. I can feel the earth warming. No one needs a car this big.
To me anyway, the Hummer scene in Hell Comes to Quahog still remains one of the funniest jokes about Hummer owners I've seen in the series. While Girl Interneted has a decent enough message behind it, it doesn't make up for the subpar jokes, the dull main story, and the boring subplot. And for the 5th best, Big Trouble in Little Quahog. Alright, a microscopic Brian and Stewie adventure? Sign me up! A complaint I sometimes hear about modern Family Guy is the lack of variation in the locations the show takes place in. Well, this episode gives a downright fascinating perspective on that location. We get that good old Brian-Stewie adventure, two characters that go together like peas in a pod, or maple syrup on pancakes, or moss in a swamp. You get the idea. The episode begins with Stewie arriving home from a birthday party with a dog whistle, and he of course begins to annoy Brian with it.
I've always wondered what that sounds like to you.
Dog whistle! Dog whistle!
So Brian takes it out of Stewie's reach and mocks him for his height. See, other lousier episodes could have easily made this the entire side plot of an episode, but it's just the basis of a much better plot. Stewie gets back at Brian by building a shrink ray and shrinking him to tiny scale, but things go south when Brian begins to be attacked by a rat, leading to Stewie shrinking himself down to defend Brian. Aw, that's nice. I like that their friendship still shines through in these modern episodes. Compadres that go together like chicken and chips, or bears and trash cans. Okay, I'll stop.
I miss Jenny.
What is that?
That's Forrest Gump.
Yeah, I don't think so.
They eventually make their way back to the controls of the shrink ray, but Brian accidentally shrinks them to microscopic proportions.
Well, why would you make the tiny button big? I had to make it big enough to write tiny on it.
Awesome! The microscopic scope of this episode allows for the animation to adapt, and we get some creative scenery never before seen in the series. Visually, this episode looks splendid, with some of the best animation the series has to offer. While Brian and Stewie try to grow themselves back, the Griffins become aware of the rats in the house and call an exterminator. Craziness ensues.
Can I press the button?
Perhaps that's a question best pondered over dinner?
You can just press it. Go ahead.
Even when they manage to get back, the insanity follows them, like hostile dust mites grown to a massive scale, and a tiny version of Tom Cruise for some reason.
Thank you, Tiny Tom Cruise. How can we ever repay you?
Well, you could make a sizable donation to the Church of Spaceship Beep Boop.
Pardon the longer plot summary, but really, it's an episode that simply needs to be heard to know how fun it is. Unlike a bad Family Guy episode, there's barely any filler or padding here. The writers take advantage of all the time given to them, with the writing and animation being some of the best we've seen in the series. If you want an example of one of the best, most well-rounded episode of Family Guy in recent years, Big Trouble in Little Quahog might be worth a look.
You have children in there?
Oh yeah, 3. Should we mention that?
And for the fourth worst, Con Harris. Now this is just a downright mean-spirited and insidious episode all round. This time we follow Stewie, Brian and Quagmire as they attempt to obtain the inheritance money from a wealthy but elderly heiress. They're extra keen because she's likely to croak very soon. Ugh, what a bunch of sad, low-class wieners. I mean, even for Brian and Quagmire, the concept is surprisingly dark for them to get themselves wrapped up in. The characters feel somehow even more selfish and malevolent than usual. And being uncharacteristically evil by modern Family Guy standards is really saying something.
Wait, but how can you be married? You don't even live together.
She's old. She says, you weren't here yesterday. I say, yes, I was, and that's it.
I feel this concept had some potential if the characters had faced any sort of conflict during their plan, but we get nothing of the sort. Instead, the writers chose to pad out the episode with boring, unnecessary filler, such as the comedic joke of having someone read out the heiress's very long last name, and it drags on and on for a painful amount of time.
That's Margaret Woolworth Carrington von Schumacher Chanel Astor Livingston Comte de Saint-Exupéry.
Or while we hold on a still shot of the characters waiting. I mean, that's Peppa Pig levels of lazy. And just to rub salt in our wounds, I guess, they use this sad joke a total of 3 times. Because everyone knows if it wasn't funny the first time, it might be funny if they repeat it over and over. And the resolution isn't even satisfying. Stewie and Brian do claim ownership of part of the estate. Unfortunately, this also means they claim part ownership of the millions of dollars of debt. It may be a fitting end to Brian's ploy, but it does leave me feeling unsatisfied. And even the subplot is as dull as dishwater. Herbert mistakenly believes Peter to be Chris's friend and offers him $600 to mow his lawn. Charming. And whatever you immediately visualize in your head, that's basically the spot-on image of how this stupid side story plays out. So Chris gets mad at Peter for receiving more attention than Herbert. Really, Chris? We had to take it there? This results in a fight for the attention of Herbert. Ew. Herbert eventually finds out that Peter isn't a teenager, but we could see all this coming from a mile off. And because they wanted to make this episode somehow even worse, they gave a long, dedicated musical number to Herbert. Oh, just what I never wanted to hear. The main plot stinks, the side plot's somehow even lousier. Con Harris is a half-baked, sour-tasting episode.
Yes, that's right. It was a Meg story.
And for the fourth best modern Family Guy episode, Inside Family Guy. Something I like about Family Guy is they often like to break the mold of the typical episode and frame things a bit differently. This episode's meant to serve as a behind-the-scenes look at how the typical Family Guy episode is produced.
So please join me as we go inside Family Guy.
They instead frame it as though it were a live-action show, and I like that each character has their own unique personality, independent of the one they portray on the show.
Being on the show reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Macbeth.
What's the quote?
Whoa! I didn't realize this was a trial. Objection, Your Honor.
Good old James Woods hosts, and he shows us how the typical episode is produced. This is interspersed with segments of the characters giving their thoughts and feelings on what's happening. The main conflict comes along when the cast kicks Peter off the show due to him being difficult to work with.
Dad refuses to interact with any actors on set. He'll only rehearse with helium balloons with crudely drawn faces on them.
I'm sorry, Meg, but you're grounded.
But Dad, the prom is tonight. Over.
And he's replaced, of course, with David Spade. And this is just as bizarre to watch as it sounds. This whole silly story leads to some very funny scenes, and it felt much more like traditional polished Family Guy to me. Probably my favorite scene is when Stewie discusses an anonymous phone call made to the network complaining about Peter.
You have no idea how bad it is here. He screams and yells and he makes a V with his fingers and then licks it like la 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 la, which I am to understand is something dirty.
Although David Spade is handled well at first, the cast quickly grows tired of him. And, as always, Peter comes back to apologize. And soon we discover the truth. This whole ordeal is a regular occurrence for production.
Every week, Peter becomes a diva, so the writers write a fake script, killing him off. He storms out, then by Friday's taping comes crawling back, and we shoot the real script.
Of course, he always forgets by Monday, and then he becomes a pain in the ass again.
The episode's a more satirical take on The Simpsons episode Behind the Laughter, but to me, this actually really stands out as a funny competitor. If you'd like a taste of some of the good stuff of modern Family Guy, you could do much worse than Inside Family Guy.
Oh, welcome back, buddy.
We missed you so much.
My online poker problem is burning like a wildfire.
And the third worst modern Family Guy episode is House Full of Peters. I tell ya, this episode just becomes more of a train wreck as it progresses. What's worse than an episode about the stereotypical cheating conflict? Combining that with a stereotypical clone the main character story. What a snore. Upon Lois discovering that Peter is a sperm donor, she encourages him to meet his offspring and have them stay for a barbecue. Fair enough so far. So soon, Lois meets Larry, a man that looks very similar to Peter in his younger years. However, they soon have an afternoon on the town, ending with Larry licking ice cream off Lois's fingers and kissing her, all while Lois shows no signs of inviting the gesture, making the scene come off as more unsettling than romantic. Peter finds out, which naturally erupts in a fight between the two. The story feels so typical for a cartoon sitcom that I swear I've seen it 1,000,000 times before. In general, the episode just isn't interesting or gripping at all. The donor part really only amounts to multiple Peters in one place, with most of them just having an added stereotype to them.
I've been looking around this whole house for something to nibble on. I think I just found it.
Another cartoon trope that I feel like I've seen 1,000,000 times before. The overdone cheating conflict is seen from a mile away, and as soon as Larry is revealed, we're just waiting for it to happen. Overall, it's just so derivative of other episodes where Lois cheats on Peter. I never saw any attempt to subvert our expectations or be original, and none of the jokes feel particularly funny either. If this episode was at least funny, this bin-done cheating clone story could potentially work, but as it stands, I'd recommend skipping it. And I think the third best modern Family Guy episode is V is for Mystery. Recently, the show has made some abridged retellings of older stories with Family Guy characters, such as High School English and Grimjob. They've also used episodes specifically to make fun of tropes, like poking fun at the past in Through the Years, or making fun of movie tropes in Three Directors. And some of these work pretty well.
Sorry, that's my car alarm. Cleveland, turn that off!
Though I think one of the best of these types of episodes is V is for Mystery. The plot's based on the stories of Detective Sherlock Holmes and his sidekick Watson, with Stewie and Brian fulfilling these roles instead, of course.
Oh, that'll be funnier when he's older and slower.
Stewie and Brian are set with the mystery of a string of murders of prostitutes, all of whose names start with the letter V. And the twist of the episode is seriously unexpected, and the experience of following Stewie and Brian as they discover the true motives behind the murders.
What are you in for? I wrath-boned somebody's Cumberbatch.
It's all pretty fascinating. Most Family Guy episodes don't often tackle plots relating to mysteries in general, so to see one done effectively in an 1800s Britain setting was a much appreciated change of pace. Speaking of a change of pace, once again the episode utilizes its time well, and features no cutaway gags. The narrative is always continuous and flowing. I also enjoyed Through the Years, but V is for Mystery particularly has that special edge to it, that edge of creativity, narrative, and effort. And the second worst modern Family Guy episode is The Unkindest Cut. I'm gonna regret talking about this, but this is definitely among the worst on this list. Just a heads up, this is discussing, but certainly not showing, a rather unpleasant subject matter, particularly for guys. You see, here we have an episode about Quagmire's castration during a shark attack. And if you managed to keep your lunch down while I was saying that, well, I admire your stomach.
Oh my god, that shark's attacking Quagmire!
I think it's got him by the wiener.
Man, that guy can get anyone to do that to him.
With Quagmire's pride and joy gone, the episode takes a, shocker, morbid approach, as he decides that he has no reason to live without it.
Doc, do you know who you're talking to? That penis was my whole life!
It's kind of sad seeing Quagmire reduce his life to only being worth living if he has a love life. I guess it's not exactly unexpected, but I thought he was a long-time aviation pilot. He helps a lot of people with that every day. He mentioned to Brian as well he works at the soup kitchen. Anyway, a dark narrative about a character who has lost their will to live can be gripping, powerful, and relatable. But it's just not the sort of serious discussion I feel Family Guy's good at tackling. BoJack? Absolutely yes. Family Guy? No. The episode fails to deliver on comedy as well, which is kind of the show's bread and butter. So many of the jokes are unfunny and completely outstay their welcome. Weirdly though, the joke I laughed at the most was the boat ramp scene early on, which goes on for a solid 2 minutes, but I was laughing the whole way through.
Maybe we won't be going water skiing today.
Hell, we're gonna be on the internet.
A considerably less funny joke was the characters considering suicide, which I've never found a particularly winning subject for Family Guy to joke about.
Here's a suggestion. Blow your brains out in front of all these people.
Is this real?
Or Peter holding up a restaurant in order to get free tacos. Conceptually, I do feel these jokes could work. I mean, I remember the suicide booth in Futurama working fine. And the robbery of a panty shop in Monty Python's Completely Different works fine enough too. The execution of these jokes mostly falls flat. Anyway, Quagmire's transsexual mum does come to save the day by bringing her old penis she had before her transition to being a woman, which is certainly very nice of her, and it shows she's a mum willing to sacrifice a whole lot for her son. As always, she makes the episode a little more tolerable just by being there. There's also a side plot of Brian and Stewie trying to track down Mort. You see, it turns out there's a bounty for Mort's arrest. Like Con Harris, it does strike me as a tad uncharacteristically devious of them, but in general, this side plot isn't given enough time to be fleshed out fully. Overall, this one stands out as one of the unfunniest, cringeworthy, and grotesque of the past few seasons. And for modern Family Guy, that's a major achievement. And for the second best, 3 directors. Well, I can guarantee you'll never have seen a Family Guy episode like this before. For the simple story setup of Peter getting fired, we get a complete freestyle version from, well, 3 different director styles: Michael Bay, Quentin Tarantino, and Wes Anderson. Even if not all the jokes work, man, this was a wild ride all the way through. Though it's probably worth noting, Tarantino's style is pretty ultra gory. Think a Kill Bill parody.
Opera music makes violence classy.
Probably my favorite of the 3 is the Michael Bay version, as I'm reluctantly most familiar with his films. But when given free rein like this, it's great to see the show's talented writers stretch their creative bone and give us something so fascinatingly stylized, gory, funny, satirical, and self-aware all in one episode.
I'm pressing the button.
You gotta put the keys in the ignition.
I've been doing that, but oh, there we go.
From every part, the camera angles, the animation style, the speech style, even the effects. With great detail, these parodies poke fun at these movies, but also show affection to them. and showing how much these director styles stand out. A particularly nice addition is a complete lack of cutaway gags. Like, there's no padding to be found here. Even the credits sequence is being utilized.
So which director thing was your favorite? Mine was this one.
Honestly, I didn't care for the episode.
While I do like some episodes' cutaways, many can be drawn out far too long, so a complete lack of cutaway gags was refreshing from an episode. Also, sadly, this was Carrie Fisher's final episode on Family Guy. You might remember she voices Angela, Peter's boss.
You're fired, Griffin, for destroying company property.
Tell it to my tongue.
Gone too soon. Way too soon. There's not much else to say here. It's simply a creative, solid set of skits with a ton of extra care and detail put in. If you're interested, check out How Peter Gets Canned.
This took a lot of work.
And before we get to the number ones, just a couple of quick honourable and dishonourable mentions. Road to India. To me anyway, this was a pretty mediocre episode, particularly by Road 2 standards, which are normally my favourite Family Guy episodes. It's just the usual story of Brian trying to get with a woman and going to great lengths to do so, but as always, ultimately failing. I've watched this episode twice now, and both times I just couldn't think of anything noteworthy to say about it. It's not particularly funny, but it's not exactly offensive to me either. Road to India feels like it's pretending to be a Road 2 episode, but really it's just a normal episode in disguise. The D in Apartment 23. Yeah, no. In a time where we're currently watching the world in shambles, due in part to some people saying and doing whatever they want without caring what others think, I have no interest in glorifying the message of this episode. Congratulations, Family Guy. You've done what every South Park episode has done for the last 23 years. You dramatize normal, socially conscious people overreacting to something to make them look like monsters and prove whatever point of the day you were trying to make. Moving on. Send in Stewie, please. The episode had a lot of potential to it, with the whole episode just being Stewie and Ian McKellen in a room together. But it just turned out to feel dull. It starts off interesting enough, with Stewie doing a monologue, but the monologue just goes on and on, taking an entire quarter of the episode, and it stops being interesting only a couple of minutes in. Stewie then sings a Hamilton song while snot pours out of his mouth. Ew. For a two-man episode, they don't really utilize their guest star until the second half. There are some revelations to Stewie's character here, but they don't really change him much. Overall, this one had its moments, but generally felt a bit lackluster to me. You can't handle the booth. This one is currently the lowest rated episode on IMDb, but I personally didn't think it was that bad. The episode tries something a bit different with the family doing a DVD commentary for an episode, and I actually found it quite fun. Though I do think I understand why people don't like it, as it's pretty hard to follow the two simultaneous plots. But honestly, Family Guy has done so much worse than this. Married with Cancer and Dead Dog Walking. You might have heard me discuss this before in Worst Adult Cartoon episodes. These episodes are just a horrible duo, and show off how pointlessly cruel Family Guy can be. Brian marries a girl who has a terminal illness, but is horrified when he finds out she is going to live. Really, Brian? 2 years later and I'm still just as revolted. Anyway, it probably won't surprise you to hear that their relationship is horrible and toxic, with the two mistreating each other to the point where Jess tries to get Brian put down. I've always found it disturbing that this is Family Guy's representation of marriage. Almost every couple I know in this show is miserable like this. If I hadn't already mentioned this in my Worst Adult Cartoon episodes, this definitely would have been on the worst list. Trump Guy. Again, made it to my worst adult list. But to summarize, it felt like a lazy excuse for political satire. Yet there was so much potential for tearing into this monster. We could have had a poignant political message that could have stood as a grounding satire amidst this insanity. Yet the most memorable part of the episode for me was hearing the family tell me they're frightened. And I felt some relatability in that. And it's just nice to know we're not alone.
Well, we had a lot of fun this week and changed 0 minds.
Anyway, all that aside, on to the number ones. And personally, I think the number one worst Modern Family Guy episode is Better Off Meg. Meg actually gets out, but she comes right back, and it's just as sad as it sounds. If you've ever wanted an episode of Family Guy that makes you feel annoyed and sad for a full 21 minutes, then I can grant you your rather odd wish. And the sad part is, I felt there was a lot of potential here. The story is, Meg is left home alone, as the family goes on a trip to the pier without her, so Meg decides to spend her day off from school by visiting the bowling alley. but good old Bruce accidentally gives Meg's driver's license to another girl, who later tragically dies in a car crash. So the news reports this as the death of Meg. On a side note, this is actually probably my favorite scene in the episode. It may sound weird, but I think it's because it's two of my favorite characters in the show, Bruce and Meg, just sharing a brief quiet moment together. And the scene of the Quiznos employees mourning their #1 customer, Meg, it's weirdly touching and beautiful. Unfortunately, it's all downhill from here.
So I guess I'm dead. And no one cares.
We get a continual parade of such lovely funeral jokes, as Bonnie wishing Joe was the one in the coffin, and Joe agreeing with her, charming, followed by the principal having nothing to say about Meg and mistaking her for a man at her funeral. About the most uninspired, typical insult they could have come up with. Were the writers just asleep for this one? And it just goes on like this. Long, repeated, drawn-out jokes of Peter obnoxiously telling people to stop crying.
There, Lois, stop your crying. Stop it. Please stop. Stop. Stop it. Stop crying.
Stewie scoffing at Meg's toilet habits even after she's dead. And just the general continual hammering home of how little anyone has to say or care about Meg.
Before we eat, would anyone like to say something about Meg?
Fortunately, Meg decides to take this opportunity to start a new life and live on her own. Thank Chapus. Honestly, I like this premise. Meg is finally free and adopts a new name. She moves into a new apartment and makes new friends.
Nice to meet you, Natalie. You want to join us on the roof and sit under string lights?
That sounds great.
Great. Maybe Meg finally has a shot at finding some tranquility and happiness now. Though on a side note, I'm surprised she doesn't go work at Quiznos. They were the only ones who I actually believed were upset when she was dead. Surely if she walked in resurrected, she'd get a free sub that day. But sadly, she somehow becomes homesick before long and considers returning home. How? But instead, she gets a successful job in managing Quiznos, and roommates with a friendly gay Chinese doctor in his lovely modern penthouse in Quahog. She adopts a cat named Bean, and never goes home again. Hooray! Nah, I'm just joshing ya. Wouldn't that be a nice ending for Meg though? In reality, before she goes back to the Griffins, she encounters Chris, who has become more popular as a result of Meg's death. Rather than Chris being happy to see that his sister is not dead, he instead has her locked up in a warehouse. And we see her left to die, so Chris can cling to his feeble high school popularity.
Sorry, Meg, but I can't let you come home just yet. I'm too popular now.
How did you feel like returning to these psychopaths again, Meg? I guess in this show's twisted logic, Chris's selfishness is supposed to let him think it's okay to murder his sister? God, these characters are awful. Anyway, next we get one of the most gross jokes I've seen in the entire show, with Meg continually splattering her brains on the concrete in a bloody mess. Seriously, did the writers think it was comic gold watching a 17-year-old girl continually bash her head against the concrete? But eventually, Meg does escape.
That's good.
Unfortunately, she goes back to the Griffins.
Ooh, that's bad.
And surprising no one, her mother won't believe she was nearly murdered. Fortunately, Chris confesses.
That's good.
But we finish the episode on her deciding to stay with the Griffins.
That's bad.
Her family have some of the most puzzling and poorly written reactions throughout the entire series in this episode. At first, upon hearing of Meg's passing, they're overwhelmed with grief, despite the fact that just moments ago they mistook a barrel wearing a wig and a hat as their own daughter. And in almost every other episode, they treat her horribly. So the whole thing feels completely out of character and really hard to buy. It's just sad because Meg is taunted with a better life away from the Griffins. If there's such a thing as a feel-good Family Guy episode, then this is the opposite of that. Bruce and the Quiznos employees are the only funny things about it. I would love to see a decent story for Meg, but this is just miserable table scraps, with a more annoying than ever return to sitcom norms at the end of the episode. Better Off Meg fails to deliver to both comedy fans and fans of dramatic somber stories. Ugh, so much wasted potential. And personally, I think the #1 best modern Family Guy episode is Dog Bites Bear. Just a heads up, a couple of spoilers here, so if you do want to see this episode spoiler free, I recommend checking it out before watching this part. But if you don't mind, let's continue. I so distinctly remember each part of this episode. So much of Brian and Stewie's humanity seeps through their lines here. Their connection, their pain, their hurt, their loss, and their eventual acceptance of each other. This is probably the most emotionally packed episode I've seen of recent years. We get to see a deeper look into the relationship between Stewie and Rupert, and how it compares to his relationship with Brian. It's a bit like a Road 2 episode, yet it gives us way more emotional depth than we'd almost ever get from a Family Guy episode. We follow Stewie's trek to Vermont to scatter Rupert's ashes, after Brian, in a drunken rage, tore the bear to shreds. Due to this, their relationship sours, with Stewie wanting nothing to do with Brian. Yet Brian decides to follow Stewie on his trip anyway, but Stewie soon grows angry from Brian and lashes out at him in a brawl.
You did it! On purpose?
But he rolls down a hill and twists his ankle. And one of the most memorable moments for the two, Brian builds a lifter to help carry Stewie to the peak of the hill. And all of this is done with wonderful pacing, and I can really feel the humanity from both these characters. These characters that so often I've wanted to like. And there's something revealed to both us and Brian here, why Stewie cherishes Rupert so much.
Brian, let's be honest. You're a middle-aged dog. You don't have that many years left. And one day, all too soon, I'm gonna be crying at your funeral in an Armani suit.
Because Stewie feels Rupert is the only friend he'll ever have after Brian eventually passes away. Brian isn't a young dog by any means. It's a serious, cold revelation that builds Stewie's character and his inner fear of losing Brian one day. It's relatable, it's powerful, and it's raw. Family Guy doesn't have that much in the way of character development, but episodes like this remind me that sometimes there's more beneath the surface than we can see. Not to mention, the side plot is also a fun little aside to the main story. It revolves around Peter getting to shake the hand of the mascot for the Boo Berry cereal. Great, perfect side plot. Peter gets starstruck and swears never to wash that hand again, resulting in it growing and festering as you might be imagining, and greatly disturbing those around him.
What the hell is that?
My blueberry hand.
This leads to his friends and Lois formulating a plan to forcefully wash his hand. Again, perfect, I love this story. It's not mind-blowing, but we want something simple here. It's a pleasant comedy relief to the more serious main story. While Family Guy is sometimes regarded as a show far past its prime, episodes like this remind me that the cast and crew are fully capable of making artistic, powerful episodes that move their audience and add some depth to their characters. Characters that I want to like. What made this list fun for me though, is that layer of the unexpected that always comes with Family Guy. When we dive into these potential train wrecks, we're liable to get anything. And quite often, I found myself chuckling suddenly and unexpectedly. I wonder if that's why it still manages to double the viewers of South Park. Because it's like a new roller coaster ride every time. We could hurl our guts, but we also at the same time could get a wild ride. Well, speculation aside, if you do feel I missed a particularly good or bad Modern Family Guy episode, or you have your own thoughts on these, feel free to leave your own thoughts in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ow.